Serena Williams, a successful black entrepreneur, faces shocking discrimination when she's publicly humiliated and physically shoved off a first-class flight by Captain Gregory Adams, a white pilot. The incident highlights a broader, deeply ingrained racism within the airline industry, with Serena fighting not only for personal justice, but for systemic change. The airline backs Adams, attempting to discredit Serena's accusations, forcing her to escalate the situation. As Serena fights to hold the airline accountable, her campaign gains global momentum, exposing the entrenched biases and power imbalances that have long marginalized black individuals in corporate spaces. It was a typical afternoon at the bustling Midway International Airport in Chicago, with passengers hurrying through the terminal, pulling their rolling luggage behind them, and the distant hum of announcements filling the air. Among the crowd, one woman stood out, Serena King. A powerful and influential businesswoman, Serena was a self-made tech mogul with a reputation for brilliance and resilience. Her sharp, tailored suit and carefully styled hair reflected her meticulous attention to detail, signaling both wealth and determination. But today, Serena felt something was off. After a draining strategy meeting with investors from around the world, all she longed for was to finally return to her home, where she could escape the pressures of her career and enjoy some peace with her family. Her first-class ticket was a reminder of all the hard work she'd put into her empire. She clasped her boarding pass firmly, walking towards her gate with the poise of someone who had earned every bit of her success. Little did she know, her flight would not be as relaxing as she had imagined. As she neared the gate, an airline employee approached her, her face flushed and her movements rushed. "Excuse me, ma'am," the attendant said, barely meeting Serena's gaze. "Your seat, 1A, is no longer available." Serena paused, confused. "What do you mean my reservation is confirmed?" she replied, holding up her boarding pass. The attendant looked nervously over her shoulder. "There's been a mix-up. We need you to take another seat. It's all been taken care of," she said, her voice wavering. Serena's mind raced. This was impossible. She'd booked this flight weeks ago, confirmed all the details. She had flown first class countless times and never had a problem. Something wasn't right. "Please, let me speak to a supervisor," Serena requested, her voice calm but firm, a clear signal that she wouldn't tolerate being dismissed. Moments later, Captain Gregory Adams appeared. He was a tall, older man with graying hair, a polished uniform, and the authoritative presence that came with years of flying. However, there was something in his eyes, an unease that didn't sit right with Serena. Without acknowledging her confusion, he turned to the employee. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked gruffly, his tone sharp. Serena stepped forward, holding up her boarding pass. "This seat is confirmed for me, and I've paid for it. I don't understand why I'm being told to move." Captain Adams glanced at the boarding pass, but dismissed it with a swift gesture. "This seat is taken," he said coldly. "You're mistaken." Serena stood her ground. "I'm not mistaken. This is my seat, and I've flown with your airline countless times. I'm not moving." His expression hardened, and there was a shift in his demeanor, something more aggressive. "You'll need to move now," he ordered, his voice laced with irritation. "This is my aircraft, and I'm in charge here." The tension between them grew palpable. Serena's heart began to race, but she refused to show fear. She was used to standing up for herself, and she wasn't about to let anyone walk over her. "I'm not moving. I paid for this seat, and I'm not going anywhere," she stated firmly. Captain Adams's face reddened, his patience wearing thin. "If you don't move right now, I'll have you escorted off the plane," he threatened, his voice low but cutting. The surrounding passengers glanced over, murmurs rippling through the crowd. Serena could feel their eyes on her, some with curiosity, others with disbelief, but no one spoke out. No one intervened. Serena stood tall, unflinching. "I'm not leaving. You can't just force me out of my seat." The words were firm, and though the captain towered over her, she didn't budge. Then, in an unexpected and violent gesture, Captain Adams raised his hand and shoved Serena. The force of the push sent her stumbling backward, her feet slipping on the slick floor. Her shoulder slammed into the edge of a seat, sending a jolt of pain through her body as she fell to the ground. The world seemed to spin for a moment. Serena struggled to catch her breath. the shock of what had just happened sinking in. The physical pain in her shoulder was sharp, but the humiliation of being shoved, of being treated like she didn't belong, was far worse. The silence that followed was deafening. Some passengers stared wide-eyed, others whispered among themselves, but no one came to her aid. The injustice of the situation hit her harder than any physical blow. As Serena gathered herself and pushed up to her hands and knees, two security officers appeared. One of them a tall woman, with a stern face. "Ma'am, you need to leave the plane," the officer said, her voice cold and detached. Serena's body trembled from a mix of adrenaline and disbelief. She couldn't comprehend what was happening. This was not supposed to be her reality, but she wasn't about to let them push her around. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, her voice steady, but filled with defiance. "I've done nothing wrong." Her resolve was unshakable. No matter how many people tried to intimidate her, she wouldn't let them take away what was rightfully hers. Serena stood her ground as the officer signaled for backup, her resolve only strengthening. She could feel the tension building around her, but she refused to be intimidated. This wasn't about a misplaced seat. It was about a system that had systematically undermined her at every turn. The airline had humiliated her, but Captain Gregory Adams's actions weren't just personal. They were a reflection of a larger issue rooted in bias and racism, something Serena was no longer willing to tolerate. The sound of the aircraft's door slamming shut behind her felt like a final suffocating blow. Alone on the tarmac, Serena's breath caught as the full weight of the injustice washed over her. This wasn't just about a flight or a seat. It was about challenging a system that had long sought to diminish her. The anger that had simmered beneath the surface for years ignited in her chest. She wasn't about to let it slide. This time, she would make sure it didn't end here. As the plane taxied away, Serena's phone buzzed in her pocket. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the name on the screen. Her father, Charles King, CEO of a multinational tech empire and a trailblazer for Black entrepreneurs, was always a pillar of strength. But this wasn't about him rushing to her rescue. It was about something much larger, a fight she couldn't ignore any longer. "Daddy, something's happened," Serena said, her voice steady, but tinged with a rawness she couldn't hide. "You need to hear this." As the roar of the engines filled her ears, the plane began to pick up speed down the runway. Serena felt like she was frozen in time, every sensation dulled, save for the fire that burned within her. The cold wind biting at her exposed skin was nothing compared to the heat of determination growing in her chest. Her phone trembled in her hand as she held it to her ear, listening to her father's familiar voice on the other end. "Serena, what's going on?" Charles's voice was laced with concern, though he knew his daughter well enough to recognize that something was terribly wrong. She could sense the weight of his worry. Taking a deep breath, Serena gathered herself. The pain in her shoulder was sharp, the humiliation still fresh in her mind. She could almost hear the whispers of the passengers who had witnessed her fall, their judgment lingering in the air, but she wouldn't let that define her. Not anymore. "Daddy, you won't believe what just happened," Serena began, her voice unwavering despite the chaos inside her. "I was kicked off a flight. They made me leave first class, and the captain shoved me." There was a pause on the line, the words hanging heavy between them. Serena could feel the weight of what she was saying. This wasn't just about a seat on a plane. It was about something deeper, something that had been building inside her for years. Charles's sharp intake of breath told Serena everything she needed to know. He understood. "I can't believe this," Charles finally said, his voice thick with quiet fury. "This is unacceptable. No one has the right to treat you like that, especially not because of who you are. We'll make sure this doesn't stand. You fought too hard for everything you've built. Now, we fight back." The calm strength in his words was what Serena needed to hear. Her father's resilience, the same resilience that had shaped her own journey, was alive in every word he spoke. But this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who had been made to feel less than, every woman who had been underestimated or dismissed because of their race, gender, or success. "I don't want you to fix this for me, Daddy," Serena said, her voice firm as she leaned into her resolve. "This isn't about money or power. This is about people like us being treated as if we don't belong, and I want to be the one to show them that we do." Her words were a declaration of war against the injustices that had too long been allowed to fester. Serena had worked her whole life to build an empire, to break barriers most never even dreamed of. But on that plane, she had faced something more insidious than the usual obstacles. This was a direct assault on her identity, a belief that she wasn't worthy of the space she had earned. Charles took a long breath, the weight of her words settling in. "I understand, Serena. But you don't have to do this alone. I'm behind you no matter what. If you need resources, if you need connections, I'll make sure you have them. But if you want to stand on your own, I'll respect that." Serena felt a swell of gratitude for her father's unwavering support, but she knew this fight was hers to lead. The world was watching now, and she would make sure they understood exactly what was at stake. Serena's phone buzzed again, but this time, it was her assistant, Rachel. "Amanda," Rachel said, using the name Serena had adopted for her professional persona. "I've been keeping an eye on things. The media is already picking up the story. It's going viral. You need to get ahead of this, before it spirals out of control." Serena's mind raced. The media could either be a blessing or a curse, but it also provided a powerful platform. She wasn't going to let this be another story about a black woman being mistreated. No. This would be the story of a fight for justice, a fight she would lead. "Get in touch with my PR team, Rachel," Serena said, her voice clear with purpose. "We're holding a press conference tomorrow. I want to address this head-on and let the world know that this is bigger than just one flight." Rachel didn't hesitate. "Got it, Amanda. I'll set it up right now. Do you want to address the media directly, or should we prepare a statement?" Serena thought for a moment. This wasn't just about correcting an injustice. It was about taking ownership of the narrative. "I'll speak directly," she said. "I want to look them in the eye and make it clear that I'm not backing down." The following day, as Serena stood in front of the mirror in her high-rise apartment, she prepared for the most important moment of her life. Dressed in her sharpest suit, her reflection seemed to stand taller, stronger, more determined than ever before. Today wasn't about telling her side of the story. It was about making a stand for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. Rachel knocked lightly before entering. "Amanda, everything's ready. The press is waiting in the conference room. Are you okay? Do you need a moment?" Serena smiled at her reflection. "I'm ready. It's time to show the world who I really am." With that, she walked out of her apartment and into the conference room, where a sea of reporters and cameras awaited. This wasn't just another press conference. This was the moment that would define her legacy. "I know some will argue that Captain Adams didn't intend to hurt me, that he was simply doing his job," Serena began, her voice steady and unwavering. "But let's be clear. No one has the right to humiliate another person simply because they disagree. No one has the right to treat someone like they don't matter just because they believe they're above them." She paused, letting her words settle in the room. "This isn't just about me. This is about the millions who've been silenced, dismissed, and made to feel invisible. People who've been told their voices don't count, that their presence doesn't belong." Her heart was racing, but her voice remained resolute. Serena knew she was no longer just an entrepreneur or a businesswoman. She was a leader of a movement, and the world was watching. "I'm asking for accountability," Serena continued, her gaze piercing as she addressed the reporters. "I'm asking for Captain Adams to be held responsible for his actions. I'm asking for the airline to acknowledge the deep, systemic issues within its ranks and take real, meaningful steps to address them. I'm asking for every person who has ever felt overlooked, oppressed, or silenced to stand with me. This fight is not just mine, it's all of ours." The flash of cameras was almost blinding, but Serena didn't flinch. She wasn't here for temporary fame or fleeting headlines. This was about something far bigger than her, a movement that would outlast this single incident, something that would reverberate across the world long after the conference was over. As the questions began, Serena faced them with calm and precision, answering each one thoughtfully, never losing her composure, even as the pressure mounted. She wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for every individual who had ever been told they didn't belong, for every woman who had been underestimated, for every person of color who had been shoved to the margins of society. When the press conference ended, Serena felt a sense of resolve unlike anything she'd felt before. This was just the beginning. Serena's phone buzzed incessantly as soon as she stepped out of the conference room. Messages poured in from every corner, some filled with support, others with backlash. It was clear that the media frenzy had only grown larger since the conference. The incident had become a symbol for racial inequality, and Serena, whether she had wanted it or not, had become the face of a movement that aimed to expose systemic oppression. But while she appreciated the support, Serena knew that she wasn't here to be a symbol. She was here to create tangible change, and that required more than just public attention. It required action. Rachel entered the room, a thick file in her hands. "Serena, you've been trending everywhere. Every major news outlet wants an interview, and there's even talk of you being invited to a social justice summit next month. This campaign is exploding." Serena didn't look up as she scrolled through the media's reactions. Some praised her, others criticized her. Many questioned her motives, dismissed her as an overprivileged billionaire, or accused her of using race as a card. She had expected this, but that didn't make it any easier. The backlash was inevitable. The uncomfortable truth for many was that Serena, as a powerful black woman, wasn't supposed to challenge the system. She was supposed to accept it. "This isn't just about headlines," Serena said, frustration creeping into her voice. "This is bigger than a single incident. It's about a system that continues to favor those in power, those who believe they can act without consequences. I won't let them turn this into a circus." Rachel nodded, clearly understanding the gravity of the situation. "I know. But right now, people are listening. We have an opportunity here. If you keep pushing, we can use this moment to spark real change." Serena's mind raced. This wasn't just about raising awareness. She was about to leverage this platform to create policy changes that would prevent future injustices. It wasn't enough to make a speech. She needed concrete steps, a real framework that would hold corporations accountable, and this campaign was just the beginning. "I've been thinking," Serena said, her voice steady. "We need a public petition, a movement that extends beyond the headlines. Let's make it clear that we won't accept these injustices any longer. We'll partner with civil rights organizations, use my platform, and bring in influencers. We're going to make sure Captain Adams isn't the only one held accountable. We'll target systemic issues, and we'll start by changing the airline industry." Rachel's eyes widened. "You're talking about a full-scale campaign? Policy change?" Serena nodded. "Exactly. Anti-racism training, more equitable hiring practices, and policies that ensure leadership in every major corporation reflects diversity and inclusivity. This isn't an isolated incident. Captain Adams' actions are just a symptom of a much larger problem. We need to address it at the root." The plan was ambitious, but Serena had never been one to shy away from big challenges. Her success had always been built on taking bold steps, and now she was ready to dismantle a system that had long been rigged. In the weeks that followed, Serena became a ubiquitous presence on news stations, at rallies, in interviews, and on social media. Her campaign, Equality in Flight, quickly gained momentum. Thousands of people from all walks of life rallied behind her, sharing their own stories of discrimination. The petition she had launched gained hundreds of thousands of signatures, calling for systemic changes in the airline industry and beyond. Serena's voice was no longer just heard in boardrooms. It was now echoing through the streets, challenging the uncomfortable truths about race, power, and privilege. This wasn't just about the plane incident anymore. It had become a call to action for anyone who had ever felt marginalized. As her campaign continued to grow, Serena's phone buzzed again one evening, before another live interview. The message was from an unknown number. Serena opened it, her fingers trembling slightly, as she read. "Dr. Williams, this is Peter Reynolds, CEO of Skylux Airlines. I've been following your campaign, and I'd like to request a meeting to discuss how we can work together to address the issues you've raised and take proactive steps to make lasting change. Please let me know when you're available." Serena's heart raced. This was the moment she had been waiting for. A major airline reaching out, not to dismiss her, but to engage in making real change. It was validation for everything she had been fighting for. But she knew this was only the beginning. The following days were filled with preparation for the pivotal meeting with Peter Reynolds. Serena's team worked tirelessly, to ensure every detail was in place. She wasn't just representing herself anymore. She was representing a global movement. The stakes were high. The meeting took place in a sleek, high-rise office in downtown Manhattan. Peter Reynolds, a man in his mid-50s, exuded calm authority, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he was ready to make things right. "Dr. Williams, thank you for agreeing to meet," Peter said as she entered, standing with a respectful nod. "I believe that together, we can make a significant impact." Serena took her seat, unwavering. "Mr. Reynolds, words are no longer enough. We need action. You're in a position to influence change. What are you willing to do?" Peter nodded. "We're already implementing anti-racism training, and we're looking into changes in our hiring practices. But we want to go further. We want to partner with you to set a new industry standard for diversity and inclusion." Serena listened closely. This was the moment she had been preparing for. The time for talk was over. "I'll work with you, but it has to go beyond training. We need measurable, enforceable policies. We need to create change from the top down." The conversation continued for hours as they discussed actionable steps. It was a breakthrough, but Serena knew this was only the beginning of a long journey. As she left the meeting, Serena felt a surge of accomplishment. Skylux Airlines was willing to take a stand. But this was just the start. The tide was turning, and Serena Williams was at the forefront of it. Serena had never been one to back down, and Captain Adams' actions weren't going to be swept under the rug. They demanded real consequences, true accountability, and most importantly, meaningful change. Late one evening, after a long day of meetings with civil rights groups, Serena sat alone in her office, reviewing the reports from her equality in flight campaign. Her mind kept drifting to Captain Adams. The anger she'd seen in his eyes, his smugness as he dismissed her, was a constant reminder. It wasn't just about one man. It was a reflection of a larger, deeply ingrained system of entitlement and unchecked power. Adams had believed that because he was a white man in a position of authority, he could act with impunity. Serena wasn't going to let him, or anyone like him, go unchallenged. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Rachel. "We need to talk. The media is asking about your next steps, and some are pushing for you to escalate the campaign. We're getting pressure from both sides now. Some are calling for legal action, while others want you to focus on policy changes. What's your gut telling you?" Serena read the message twice before typing her response. She was already weighing her options, but it was time to make a decision. This wasn't about her own vendetta. It was about making a statement that would echo far beyond this single incident. "I'm taking legal action," Serena replied. "We've got a strong case, but I want more than just holding Captain Adams accountable. I want to challenge the entire airline industry. It's time to make them all answer for their actions." Rachel responded almost immediately. "Got it. I'll work with the legal team and prepare a statement. I'll also strategize how we can maximize the impact of this." Serena put her phone down, her gaze drifting to the city skyline outside her window. There was no turning back now. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for millions of people who had been silenced, marginalized, and ignored by a system that refused to change. This was her moment, and she was going to make sure it would never be forgotten. In the following weeks, Serena's legal team filed a lawsuit against Skylux Airlines, demanding both compensation for the emotional distress she had endured and sweeping changes to the company's policies on racial discrimination. The media frenzy surrounding the case was immediate and intense. Interviews, talk shows, and social media all amplified her message. This wasn't just a fight against one pilot, but a broader movement against racial inequality that plagued the airline industry and beyond. At the same time, the Equality in Flight campaign gained massive traction. Serena's petition, which had started with just a few thousand signatures, grew to millions in a matter of weeks. People from all walks of life, sharing their own stories of discrimination, rallied behind her. Serena was invited to speak at major conferences on racial justice, where her words resonated with people who had been fighting similar battles for years. What had started as a personal incident had snowballed into something much larger. It was now a global call for justice, change, and equality. Serena's resolve only grew stronger. She knew the fight wouldn't be easy. She knew the opposition would be fierce, but the support from everyday people, activists, and even some corporate allies fueled her determination. She was no longer just an individual businesswoman. She was the leader of a movement that could no longer be ignored. One evening, as Serena prepared for yet another televised debate on racial equality in corporate America, Rachel entered the office with a serious expression. Serena immediately sensed something was amiss. "What's going on?" Serena asked, setting her papers aside. "It's about Captain Adams," Rachel replied. "We just got word that he's making a public statement, and Skylux is backing him. They're claiming that your accusations are exaggerated, that he's being unfairly targeted." Serena's fists clenched. She had expected this denial, deflection, and the attempt to discredit her. This was the game they played, but it only solidified her resolve. "Exactly what I expected," Serena said, her voice calm, but filled with intensity. "They're trying to make this about me, trying to turn it into a personal vendetta. But it's not. This isn't just about one man. It's about a system of power that needs to be dismantled, and it's not just Captain Adams. They're all complicit." Rachel nodded, understanding the weight of Serena's words. "I know you're not backing down, but we need to hit back hard. We need to make sure the world knows what this is really about." Serena leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing as she began to strategize. "We're not just trying to win a lawsuit or get an apology. We're here to show that the structures of power, whether in the airline industry or any other sector, cannot continue to operate with impunity. It's time for accountability." The next day, Serena released a video on social media. Her face was calm, but there was a fire in her eyes that couldn't be ignored. "Good evening," Serena began, her voice steady and commanding. "By now, many of you have seen the statements from Captain Adams and Skylux Airlines. They want you to believe that this is a personal dispute, that I'm somehow exaggerating the events of that day. Let me be clear. This is not a personal attack. This is not about one man. This is about a system that has been rigged for too long, a system that continues to protect those in power while ignoring the voices of the oppressed." She paused, letting her words sink in. "This fight is bigger than me," Serena continued. "It's about every person who has been told they don't belong, every black woman who has been told she's not good enough, every person who has been pushed aside because of their race. I am not backing down, and neither should you." The video went viral almost immediately, spreading across social media, news outlets, and activist networks. The response was overwhelming. People from around the world rallied behind Serena, sharing her video, signing petitions, and organizing rallies. This was no longer just her fight. It had become a collective movement. As the weeks passed, Serena's legal team continued preparing for the trial, but her focus remained on the larger picture. She wasn't just holding Captain Adams accountable. She was aiming for systemic change that would ripple across the entire corporate world. Her campaign, Equality in Flight, had gained unprecedented momentum, and now, people from all corners of society were joining the movement. The media storm surrounding the legal case continued, but Serena was no longer just reacting. She was shaping the narrative. One evening, Rachel entered the office, her expression filled with urgency. "Serena, we've just received an offer from Skylux. They're willing to settle. They're offering a substantial sum to cover damages, but they also want to partner with you on diversity initiatives. They want to avoid a public trial." Serena looked up, a quiet fire burning in her eyes. She had expected this move, but it didn't sit right with her. A settlement was just a temporary fix, a band-aid to cover up the deeper issues. "No," Serena replied firmly. "This can't be about money. This can't be about avoiding accountability. We're not taking the settlement unless it includes concrete changes, policy changes, that we've demanded. I want the world to know that Skylux is committed to real progress, not just words on paper." Days later, Serena received a call from an unexpected source, Captain Adams himself. His voice sounded strained. "Dr. Williams, I never thought I'd be the one calling you. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I should never have treated you that way. I've been speaking with people who are trying to educate me, and I now understand that my actions were wrong. I'm willing to take responsibility." Serena listened, but her response was calm, yet resolute. "Captain Adams, I appreciate your apology, but it's not enough. The work you need to do is not just internal, it's public. You need to show the world that you understand the gravity of your actions. You need to be part of the solution, not just a man trying to avoid consequences." This conversation was just one small piece of the puzzle. While Adams's apology was a step in the right direction, Serena knew the real work was still ahead. The movement she had ignited was not just about individual apologies, it was about dismantling a broken system. As the date for the Global Diversity Summit approached, Serena stood before an audience of thousands, her heart pounding with anticipation. This was the culmination of everything she had worked for, the chance to create lasting, institutional change. "I'm not here to ask for your pity," Serena began, her voice steady and commanding. "I'm here to ask for your action. We've reached a critical juncture in history. We have a choice to make. Will we continue to allow systems of oppression to exist unchecked, or will we stand together to dismantle them and build a world where everyone has a seat at the table?" The room was silent as her words rang out. Serena Williams wasn't just speaking to those in the room. She was speaking to the world. This was the beginning of a new era, and Serena was determined to lead it.